Hello, everyone. This is Azren, the language nerd here. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'm the owner of the Calgary Language Nerds, and welcome to this video or podcast episode, depending on where you are consuming this. Now, this is another video slash audio, again, depending on if you're listening to this on a podcast or watching a video, for my Azren's Top Language Learning Tips webpage. I made the first video in this series, would have been just last week or a little bit less than a week ago. If you didn't watch that video, here's a little brief summary of what Azren's Top Language Learning Tips is. I've made thousands of videos and podcasts over the past 7 years, since 2016, with different language learning advice. And I thought it would be helpful for language learners if I were to create a single page that summarizes the advice that I've shared over the past 7 years, that shares the fundamentals, some of the most important things that you should know when it comes to learning a language. My hope is that if I can summarize all the thousands of videos and podcasts and such that I've made over 7 years, if I can summarize it onto one page, distill all the best knowledge there, my hope is that you can consume it relatively quickly and have all the tools you need at your disposal, or at least a lot of the tools you need at your disposal to go learn a language successfully. So today, I'm going to talk about 3 fundamentals when it comes to improving your ability to speak in another language. Most people I've come across over the years when they're learning a language, being able to speak the language they're learning is an important part of the process for them. They do want to be able to speak the language. They don't just want to be able to read, write, or listen to the language. There are some exceptions, of course. For example, if someone's learning Latin, I have met Latin learners that don't care as much about the spoken side for obvious reasons. But generally speaking, when I meet language learners, being able to speak the language is something that matters to them. So what are the most important things when it comes to improving your speaking ability? Well, there are 3 things to know. The first one is to understand that input is important. If you haven't heard the term input before, let me explain to you what it is. Input refers to listening and reading. Listening and reading is very important to improve your speaking. This is something I'm going to dive more into in the next video and podcast episode in this Azren's Top Language Learning Tips series. But please note for the time being that you need to do lots of listening, you need to do lots of reading. That will help your speaking ability. There are numerous reasons for it, but one big reason for it is that it's through your listening and your reading that you're going to boost up your vocabulary. That is one excellent way to learn new words. And in order for you to be able to speak, you do need to know lots of words, obviously. When you listen, or read as well, it also exposes you to how people communicate in a natural way. You hear someone say a sentence in a particular way, and that might show you a model to imitate. I myself, many times, have heard someone say a sentence or a phrase in a particular way, and I think to myself, oh, I really like that. I never thought that I could use those words in that way. I'm going to say that myself. So it gives you a model to follow, gives you something to imitate. There are other reasons as to why input is important, aka listening and reading is important, but those are 2 really big ones. So that's number 1. If you want to get good at speaking, listening and reading is important. Again, I'm actually going to dive more into that input side in the next lesson. So please stay tuned for that next lesson. I'm going to dive into way more detail on the input side of things. The second piece of advice is speak to a real human being, at least somewhat regularly. Lots of language learners I've come across over the years, they don't talk to anyone in the language that they're learning. They spend all their time using textbooks, apps, self-study podcast style programs. Maybe they do writing, maybe they're doing all sorts of different things to learn the language, but they're not talking to a real human being or multiple real human beings in the language that they're trying to learn. Speaking to someone in the language you're trying to learn, even if it's somewhat regularly, is very important. Now, some of you might be wondering, particularly the very analytical types, you might wonder, how much speaking should I be doing? Well, I'll give you an absolute bare minimum. The bare bone minimum, I would say, if you want a standard to follow, would be twice a month for 30 to 60 minutes. So 2 sessions of speaking with a real human being, ideally a native speaker, or if not, someone who's very, very advanced in the language. 2 times a month for 30 to 60 minutes. That's a very good guideline to follow. Even better is every single week, at least once a week. So call it 4 times a month for 30 to 60 minutes. Basically, more is better. Speaking regularly is important. You don't have to speak from day one, not necessarily. That's not something you must do in order to learn a language successfully. Some people like to speak from day one, some people don't. That's a whole debate, and that's something that we can dive into on another day, but we're not going to do it today. We're going to keep things very simple today. You don't have to speak from day one. You can focus in the beginning just on using apps or doing listening or reading, things of that nature. But at some point, it will be important to incorporate some speaking into your language learning routine. Okay? Now, here's the third thing, and this ties directly into speaking regularly. When you're doing your speaking, whether it be in a conversation class, whether it be with a friend or whoever it's with, when you are speaking with someone, it's important to challenge yourself in that conversation. This is particularly important advice, I would say, for people that have an intermediate level in the language that they're learning. There is something called an intermediate plateau. The intermediate plateau is where you're at this intermediate level and you feel like you're not progressing anymore. That is also a topic we can dive into lots of detail on another day, but this is a relatively common phenomenon. And frequently, one way that people get to that intermediate plateau is they learn a language by using whatever methods they did. Often they were doing lots of speaking, often, not always, but often they were doing lots of speaking to get to that intermediate level. Maybe they were taking conversational lessons with a private tutor, maybe, who knows, they're doing lots of speaking. But then they get to that intermediate level, they keep using the same resources they did to get to that intermediate level. And what's most relevant here, they keep having the same types of conversations they did to reach that intermediate level. What they don't realize is now that they're at an intermediate level, in order to push that speaking skill to a new level, in order to push your speaking ability past the intermediate level into, for example, an advanced level, well, you have to challenge yourself in those conversations. You have to talk about topics that maybe you're less familiar with. You need to try to articulate yourself in more specific terms. Maybe right now you're the master of avoiding words you don't know and finding a synonym. Maybe this is a time to stop doing that. And when you're in a conversation, actually pause and ask the other party, the other person you're talking to, hey, how do I say this? How would I say something like this? Or maybe you look it up in a translator. How would I actually say that specific term, that specific word, that specific phrase, for instance? So challenging yourself in those speaking sessions that you do, particularly at the intermediate level where it's easy to slip into conversations where you are riffing off each other, meaning you say something, they reply, and you're just having this great conversation, but you're staying in your comfort zone in terms of words, phrases, etc., right? And so you don't challenge yourself, and so you stay stuck. There are other factors as to why people get stuck in that intermediate zone. Again, you're more than welcome to look through my other content or send me a message. I'm happy to give you some advice on that, but that is one reason as to why people can get stuck at that intermediate zone. Okay, so let's recap those 3 things, and then I'll tell you where to find people to speak with in case you don't know. So let's recap those. Number 1, input is important. Input meaning reading and listening. Number 2, speak regularly with another person. Bare minimum, 2 times a month for 30 to 60 minutes. Bare minimum, more is better. And number 3, when you're talking to someone, make sure you challenge yourself in those conversations. Explore new topics you're unfamiliar with. Stop avoiding the words and phrases you don't know how to say and actually try to figure out how to say them. For example, push yourself a little bit, challenge yourself. Now, for those of you that think to yourselves, well, I don't know how to find someone to speak with. I would love to talk to someone, but I don't have anyone to talk to. Well, I'll give you a couple of options. You could talk to a friend if you happen to know anyone. You could talk to family if you happen to know someone. You could, for example, maybe look, depending on where you live, you might be able to find some local groups on Facebook groups, or perhaps on a website like meetup.com, meetup.com. You might be able to find some people locally in your city that speak the language you're trying to learn. But by far, one of my most foolproof favorite ways to find someone to actually speak with in another language would be to use a website such as italki.com. That's spelled italki.com. And you can find, for a wide selection of languages, you can find private tutors that will be more than happy to do conversation practice with you, generally at a very affordable rate. So for example, if you were talking to someone, let's say we did that bare minimum twice a month, 30 to 60-minute conversation sessions, you should be, depending on the language, you should be able to find someone who will do that conversation with you for, let's call it $25 an hour, $30 an hour. Often way less than that, often quite a bit less. Often it will be $10 an hour, $12 an hour, $13 an hour, $15 an hour, $9 an hour. Often it will be less, but on the higher end, you'll find someone for $25 to $30 an hour. And if you are really only doing, let's say, 2 30-minute sessions a month, that's only $25 a month, right? Maybe $30 a month for those 2 sessions. And if you're not talking to anybody, you're literally talking to 0 people, that's probably going to be worth the money. And to be honest with you, for most of you, you will get it for less than $25, $30 an hour. You will find people for a wide selection of languages, you will find instructors that charge less than that. Okay, so I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, you're welcome to contact me, Azren, thelanguagenerd.com/contact. That's AZ or ZREN, thelanguagenerd.com/contact. My email is there, all my social media platforms are there, everything is on that page. So you can contact me in whatever way you like to contact people. Okay, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll chat soon. Bye-bye.